Um, Jeremiah also speaks to the famines and the pestilence that are going to come upon um, Babylon as well. And I think what's really interesting about Jeremiah and all of the prophets really is they've received visions, but the visions that they received were um, had many layers to them. So they were speaking of, in some instances, they were speaking of the current times they were going through. In other instances, they were speaking of the end times, um, or other future times. And in some instances, they were speaking of both. But Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Isaiah, um, they all spoke of the end times. And here's a good example of that. Um, Jeremiah chapter 21, verse 9. He that abideth in this city shall die by the sword, and by the famine, and by the pestilence that he goeth out, and falleth to the Chaldeans that besiege you. He shall live, and his life shall be unto him for a prey. So it talks about famine here, that again occurred at that time, but is also occurring now. The Chaldeans being the ruling class of Babylon. We'll go into this word here and see the biblical usage. H3778. Outline of biblical usage. In a territory in lower Mesopotamia bordering on the Persian Gulf, the inhabitants of Chaldea living on the lower Euphrates and Tigris, those persons considered the wisest in the land. Which is also, again, as we saw in Revelation, metaphor for the rulers of the modern day Babylon. And what's interesting about this, and I want to go further into this concept of these repeating patterns that we see in prophecy and in the scriptures, and it repeating on many different levels and in many different ways. Ecclesiastes chapter 1 and verse 9. The thing that hath been is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done, and there is no new thing under the sun. The prophecies that happened before are happening again. We see it repeating in different ways, or different different level. I guess not necessarily different ways, different levels, and that's where this concept of fractal comes in, which I think is a really great way to understand this further. And so let's take a look at the definition of the word fractal. I'll start with Edom Online. Fractal, a never-ending pattern. Many important spatial patterns of nature are neither irregular or fragmented to such as an extreme degree that classical geometry is hardly of any help in describing their form, like the growth of trees, for instance. And within that, or greater than that, is the growth of a forest. I'm not really explaining it well. Let me go on to this next definition to get a little bit more clarity. An object whose parts, at infinitely many levels of magnification, appear geometrically similar to the whole. So patterns within patterns, even if it doesn't necessarily look like it is a pattern. Fractals are used in the design of compact antennas and for computing modeling of natural-looking structures like clouds and trees. The key word here being natural-looking structures, clouds and trees, because it's that natural design that may not necessarily look like it contains patterns, on the surface if you're just looking at a tree, but it does. And this is, I think, the beauty of the magnificent design of this earth, physically, but also, I guess, prophetically and spiritually as well. This fractal design extends far beyond just the physical, what you can sort of see and touch, but patterns of time throughout history and um, and the future. Um, let's see down here. A geometric figure that repeats itself under several layers of magnification and shows self-similarity on all scales. A geometric figure that appears irregular at scales of length. Appears irregular. Appears being the key word, but is not irregular. And here's a visual representation of a fractal. These are very simple patterns, but you see triangles within triangles within triangles within a greater pattern. Here is like a really good example here. You have one great big triangle comprised of, you know, thousands of smaller triangles. You can see, you know, this big one composed of 4 triangles here, which are comprised of any number of triangles underneath. These are very basic looking fractals, or more simple ones, but you can get these outrageously complex fractals, right, that at first glance they don't necessarily appear like there's repeating patterns in them, or maybe there's some, but mathematically, and when you take a closer examination, you see that it is all one great repeating pattern. And I think that's just, again, a testament to the beauty and the complexity of what is possible. And this definition from Wikipedia, well, here's, I think this is very helpful to see here. At greater magnification, you just see the pattern repeating itself and repeating itself over and over and over, which, you know, I think it's kind of cool that at first glance you would never even be able to see or know or understand all of the great patterns that were contained within just that great image you see that it started there with. And of course down below here is kind of a more simple fractal pattern with squares, but fractal pattern nonetheless. So back to the topic at hand. During this period of famine that we're going into, as the elect of the nation of Israel, and I hope that I am of that number, we don't need to be worried or concerned in those days, you know, provided we are doing everything within our power to be pleasing unto the Most High. This is Psalms 37:19. They shall not be ashamed in the evil time, and in the days of famine they shall be satisfied. But the wicked shall perish, and the enemies of the Most High shall be as the fat of lambs. They shall consume into the smoke. They shall consume away. Ultimately, a sacrifice, or a metaphor for a sacrifice here. And I wanted to briefly, before I wrap up the lesson, also go into famine happening in another way, in sort of a another way to look at it, another fractal branch, I suppose you could say. Amos 8:11, behold, the days come, saith the Most High Yahawah, that I will send a famine in the land, not a famine of bread, nor a thirst for water, but of hearing the words of the Most High. And they shall wander from sea to sea, and from the north even to the south, even to the east. They shall run to and fro to seek the word of the Most High, and shall not find it. And here we have famine coming in a very different form that we saw, not one of physical want of bread and water, although that is coming as well, but a want for the word. And of course, many times in the scriptures, the idea of water and bread used as a metaphor for this word and this truth. And again, another branch to the beautiful sort of fractal tapestry that the Most High has woven for us in I guess in this world we call Earth, in this dimension. So some very interesting food for thought there. Um, I think delving further into the different patterns you see within the scriptures and how they repeat um, is a great way to enhance your understanding of the scriptures, and also just get a better sense of how to navigate and move in the latter days. I'll end it up there, and with that, shalom.